All right, everyone. Good morning, and thanks for joining. My name is Craig Kaiser. I'm the president and co-founder of LandGate, and I'm going to be talking to you today about mineral rights. I do have a brief presentation that I'm going to be going over today with you all, but really the purpose of this webinar is to see if there's anyone here that has any questions. Absolutely utilize us as a resource. Happy to answer those questions when we get through the presentation and see what I can do to assist you all there. But quick house cleaning here. We are recording this webinar. So if you want to rewatch or look at any of the material that we've presented, this will be sent out to you in a follow-up email. So you will get a copy of this. And if you have any questions, at the bottom of your screen, there should be a Q&A or a chat button. Feel free to go ahead and just put your questions in there and I will address them. Jordan is online with us as well from LandGate, so she'll be keeping track of those as we go through the presentation. But very informal, if you will. Again, if you have any questions at any time, feel free to put those in the Q&A in the chat and I will absolutely address them. So we'll go ahead and get started here. There we go. Just a quick background or a quick update of what LandGate actually is. For those of you who have not heard of us before, we are a free listing marketplace for natural resources and land. So landowners can come to LandGate, and if they're interested in potentially getting their minerals leased or trying to get their land leased for a solar farm or battery storage or a wind farm or carbon credits, we are an open marketplace where there is no cost to the landowner to do those things. You can look up your property on our website, landgate.com. You can quickly search for your property. And on top of us being a marketplace, we're also an analytics platform. So we don't anticipate anyone on the call to be a geologist or an engineer or any of those things. What we do is we look at all of the very, very technical data and we break down your specific parcel and we help you understand what is your minerals worth, what is your land worth, what is the solar potential, wind potential, carbon credits, things like that. And here coming very soon, we're going to be able to also append values for mining minerals, so construction, aggregate, precious minerals, rare earth minerals, things like that. Also doing battery storage and electrical vehicle charging. So that's going to be rolled out in the next few months. But there is no cost to that. So if you want to go and look up your property right now during this webinar, I'd say hold on for about 20, 30 minutes until we're done with the webinar, and then you can go and look it up. But you can go to landgate.com, look up your property, and get all of that information for free.
Christian has a question in the chat.
Okay.
They ask, can a third party list a land on behalf of a landowner?
Absolutely. Great question. So there are thousands of real estate and land professionals across the United States who list their clients' properties up on the website. There's also family representatives who list their property up there. So yeah, it's an open marketplace. We are not a pass-through. So when you create your listing up on LandGate, whether it's your property yourselves, whether you're a realtor, land professional, or you're just a representative of that land, your contact information goes up as on the listing, and potential buyers, specific buyers who utilize LandGate on the energy side of our platform, who get access to all of this data, they see your listing and they're going to reach out to you directly. So it's a direct relationship between you as the seller or people trying to get leased to the folks that are looking for your property. So that's a great question. And I see there's a couple more here. We'll try to knock these out. Okay, that's good. Listed a couple lands in December so far. No lead. Is it really a market there for this? So it depends. It depends on what you're listing, number one, and what resource you're listing and where it's at in the United States. I'm going to show you here in a little bit. If you're listing properties for mineral rights in northern Idaho, you're probably never going to get a bite on it just because there's no resource there. Now, you may want to look at a different type of resource for that land, maybe listing it for hard rock minerals or carbon credits. So depending on where you're at in the country, there's going to be high value resources in certain parts of the country where there's low value resources on other parts of the country. So that has a lot to do with it. There's many other factors, size of the property, dependent on the types of resource, things like that. But yeah, we try to allow folks to be as successful as possible. So always, if you have any questions about what we can do to help uh, get some more views on the listing, feel free to pick up the phone, give us a call. Always happy to help out and give suggestions where we can there. But let's go ahead and get into the presentation here real quick. I'll try to cover some of the questions afterwards, because really that's what I think we want to kind of focus on today is the oil and gas portion. So like I said before, depending on where you're at in the United States, you could have extraordinarily high mineral value, or you could have essentially zero mineral value for oil and gas. What you're looking at here on this map, this is LandGate data. This is proprietary data to us. We go to every state website or regulatory agency website. We pull the data in, we condition that data so it's usable. And what you're seeing here and with those green dots, those are producing wells throughout the United States. So you can see there's certain states that have a significant amount of oil and gas production and significant amount of mineral value. And then there's some states that have virtually none. So depending on where you're at in the country, this is going to affect whether or not you have mineral value. You see South Texas, West Texas, Oklahoma, the Appalachian region, some portions of the Rocky Mountains, especially North Dakota, Eastern Wyoming, Central Colorado, significant mineral value there. The reason why you have such isolated pockets of producing minerals and then portions of the United States where there's virtually none is because of the types of rock that exist there. Most of the concentrations of these producing wells are what's located in sedimentary basins. So these are collections of old rocks and stuff that's been eroded off of mountain uplifts where a bunch of organic material, and that's the scientific definition of organic, stuff that was once living, bacteria, plankton, things like that, that was living in water columns. This stuff died, fell to the ocean floor, and over millions and millions of years, it was buried under other stuff, other rocks and sediments and things, and it was cooked. The deeper it gets in the subsurface, the hotter it gets, and that dead stuff gets cooked, and that's what oil and gas is. It's the literal definition of organic. Oil and gas is dead living, so that stuff that used to be alive, right? So that's why you have high concentrations of oil and gas in certain areas and you don't have it in other areas, because the rocks don't exist. All of the dead stuff that was once there when it was an ocean, those rocks are no longer in those areas. Okay, so that's good to know. This is kind of shows you where high activity is. There's different statuses of wells. A lot of folks get kind of blurry-eyed when they hear, well, there's an oil and gas well right next door or nearby and it's producing. Well, doesn't mean that it's producing a lot. There's a very large amount of wells that are no longer producing. They're plugged and abandoned. There's wells that are producing. There's drilled wells, permitted wells, a whole bunch of different categories. But that's part of what LandGate does, provides a massive amount of information. So if you do have producing wells nearby, go to landgate.com. You can actually click on the well, and we will show you how much the well is producing, how much more the well is likely to produce, and you get an understanding. And if you do that in your area, especially if you have a lot of oil and gas in the area, you're going to find out that there's significant amount of wells that don't produce very much oil and gas. Most of the wells, especially vertical wells throughout the United States, produce less than 10 barrels a day. Most of them, probably closer to 1, 2, 3 barrels a day, right? So that's important to at least understand there. So what most people do not understand is that we live in a very, very blessed country, and we're all very blessed to be fortunate enough to live here, because United States is the only country in the world outside of a few small locations in Canada where all of us on this call as private citizens can own minerals. We can own the minerals, meaning that we own the oil and gas. We can lease those rights out to folks to drill and produce, and we get paid for that. That is an extraordinarily rare anomaly in the United States or across the world, because in most places the government owns everything. So that's really important to know. Most people are not aware of that. Throughout the United States, there is large portions of those minerals that are held by private landowners, about 60%. But then there's also a significant amount that the government does own and control. So federal government, they control about 31% of the minerals, 9% go to individual states, and about 2% to tribal lands. Here's a visual breakup of what that map looks like. Obviously, as the country developed and progressed through time, the mineral ownership and what was included as part of the United States changed as well. So this map shows you everything that's in gray. That's private mineral ownership. And you can notice that there's a stark contrast from what you see in the western portion of the United States versus the eastern portion of the United States. The western portion of the United States, a very significant percentage. And I want you to kind of focus, look at Nevada. So if we look at Nevada here, right where my mouse is, if we look at Utah, we look at portions of New Mexico, Colorado, Wyoming, a significant amount of that is controlled by the Bureau of Land Management. So it's federally controlled by the government. Other portions are state controlled, things like that. So the western portion, the later portions to join into the Union of the United States, those typically have more minerals controlled by the government. The further east you are, so if you get east of the Rocky Mountains, you can see that a very significant number, the vast majority of the minerals are controlled by private individuals or corporations there. A lot of folks get confused when they look and see what their mineral rights, how they're described and where they're located. That is due to the complete separation from surface rights and mineral rights. They can be completely separated. So what if you own a 40-acre tract of land in Iowa and you have minerals with it, the descriptions could be completely different because the minerals were described differently than your surface ownership currently has. So whatever the surface parcel is could be completely separate from where the mineral parcel is. The reason for that, especially in the western portion of the United States, the land was broken up into a grid system called township, section, range in the western portion of the United States, where each square mile was labeled, and within a township, there was 36 square miles. So oftentimes what you'll see in a description, especially if you're in the western portion of the United States, you'll see, for example, like 1 north, 36 west, section 6. That's defining what township you're in and what section you're in. So again, these are each 1 square mile. Within those square miles, there's also divisions there. They keep broken up by quarters and quarters. So keep that in mind that your surface description of your property and your mineral description of your property rarely, if ever, if you own minerals, rarely line up to be the same thing. Here's an example of what that township section and range looks like. And here you can see some data that we have on LandGate here. You can see the transmission lines. So again, we're pulling in some solar data here. Transmission lines, substations, things like that. But you can see this grid pattern underneath where each one of these, here's a section, it's a square mile. And within each one of those square miles, there's divisions. But you can see those square miles are broken up into townships, where you can see this one is 1 north, 66 west. This is 1 north, 67 west. And within each one of those townships, you have your 36 square mile blocks there called the sections. This is fairly straightforward and much easier to identify land in the western portion of the United States. Now, there's a significant amount of government-owned land there, but this was before, there was not a lot of surveying done at all. So the government came in, did these surveys, very, very wide tracts of land, and that's how they were described. In the eastern portion of the United States, we have what's called meets and bounds. Much, much more complex and complicated descriptions of land because these chunks of land were added into the United States over time, and each one of them had a little bit different way to describe their land, whether it was acquisition from the Spanish or the British or whoever it was, they were all describing land a little bit differently. And even today, some of you in the eastern part of the country, or even down in Texas, you likely have a mineral description that is a paragraph long, and it tells about walking certain distances from an oak tree and turning a certain vector and walking another distance to a boulder and walking further to a house and things like that. And that's how the land was described 150, 200 years ago. Well, now it's very difficult because the oak tree might not be there, the rock might not be there, the house has moved, things like that. The river has meandered. Meets and bounds descriptions can get very, very difficult. So that can get very complicated, and most folks are going to need some assistance understanding what they actually have. Surveying companies, things like that can really be of great assistance. But that's likely why, especially if you own multiple mineral assets in different states, you can have completely different descriptions of where those minerals are actually located. So that's the reason why, is actually how the United States developed and how this land was originally described. Mineral ownership can get extraordinarily complex as well. There's likely some folks on the call here that you own minerals, but you don't know how much, and you don't know really where it's at. And here's the reason why, is mineral ownership can be passed down. Fractions of mineral ownership can be passed down. The vast majority of mineral ownership we've seen throughout the United States, it's fractional ownership. So very, very rarely does a owner own 100% of their minerals. Typically what they own is a percentage of a description of minerals. So let's go through this example here. Let's say, and remember, we will go 640 acres is a square mile. That's essentially a section. So let's go back to our example of looking at just 1 square mile. Let's say that there's a family owned 1 section of land in western Nebraska, wherever it was, and the original owner owned 100% of those minerals. Let's say they homesteaded it in 1880, whenever it was. They had 2 children. The original owners had 2 children. The original owners died, and they passed down 50%. They split the minerals. Now, they didn't say that this person owns 320 specific minerals and this person owns 320 specific minerals. They said each one of their siblings, each 2 siblings, they get 50% of all of the minerals. All the minerals that the original owners had, all 640 acres, they're going to split that ownership 50% to one sibling, 50% to the other. Okay, so let's just keep going down this, assuming that everybody has 2 children and passes down their ownership the same way the original owners did. As you can see through time, each generation, more folks get added into that pool of ownership. Each time that happens, the individual owners are diluted based on how many people are added into the tree. So you can see after 5 generations, there's 16 different owners on the minerals, each owning 6.25% of the minerals across the entire 640 acres. It's not that they own specific pieces of minerals in this section. They own a percentage of the entire section. Okay, that's a really, really important thing to understand as a landowner, mineral owner. That is likely what type of mineral ownership you have. You likely own a portion of a larger tract of minerals that is also owned by multiple other folks. In most cases, it's family members, and some of these folks you may never even realize that you're related to. And this is why, because it can go all the way back to who the original owner is. Now, keep in mind, at any moment, this is where it gets really, really messy and very complicated on the mineral title ownership. Let's say in the second or third generation that one of those owners sold their portion of the minerals. They didn't sell specifically a certain number of minerals. They sold their percentage across the whole 640 acres. That brings an entirely new group of owners into this pool where now those individual owners can essentially do whatever they wish with their individual ownership. And that's same with everybody on the call. Let's go back to the example. After 5 generations, each 16 people, and this would be a very straightforward example because everybody has just passed the minerals down. There hasn't been any changes of ownership from selling or things like that. But each of the 16 owners after 5 generations, they can do what they individually want to do with their ownership, as long as it's not into a trust that that limits what the owners can do because the trust essentially owns it. As long as it's individual ownership, those individual owners can do whatever they wish to do. If 15 out of the 16 people in this example choose to lease or sell their minerals to a certain entity, they can choose to do that. And the one person who chooses not to has the choice to do that. They can do whatever they wish with their own individual percentage of the overall ownership that they have. So this could be, if you get anything out of this webinar, this is really a really important concept to try to digest and understand how exactly you have ownership in minerals. And you likely have a description. So let's look at this. If I'm one of the 16 people in this generation, I'm going to have a description that says I own minerals on 640 acres. And I do. I own a percentage of every acre in the 640 acre tract. A lot of people assume and they say, well, I own 640 acres. That's true. You own a percentage of 640 acres. That percentage can go anywhere from 100 to tiny fractions, very small fractions. I've seen 0.0000001%. That's not an exaggeration. Some of them get down to 6 or 7 decimal places. So what's in the overall description of the minerals that you own may not tell you exactly how many what we call net mineral acres. If I was to take this 6.25% and multiply it by 640, how many acres I'm actually going to get paid for if I sell the minerals or if I lease the minerals. Okay. That number is extraordinarily hard to determine. And what I would suggest is, unless you have a very sizable mineral position, when I say sizable, you know that you own above 10% on something like 640 acres or a couple sections, it's probably not worthwhile to go out and pay someone to do a title search for you. If you have high value minerals and you're in an area of the United States where people want to either lease or buy your minerals, they're going to tell you that. And they're going to make offers to you. And that's a great way to figure out, well, how do I know if I have minerals or not? Go back through your family tree and where you think you passed minerals are passed to and ask them, you know, check your own records. Have you received an offer to lease? Have you received an offer for someone to buy your minerals? If that's the case, you likely do own minerals for a certain percentage somewhere, right? How much you exactly own, that's kind of difficult to nail down. What is mineral ownership? What does that exactly mean? So if likely everybody on the call, if you own property, you own the surface, myself included. I'm president, co-founder of this company. I do not own the mineral rights on my property because I had no interest in buying the mineral rights because there's no value. I'm a geologist, I'm a former energy executive. I don't care about owning the minerals here because there's no potential for oil and gas production. But I own the surface. Okay. Somebody else owns the minerals underneath my property. How many people? I don't know. I have no clue because I haven't ran the title. Not really interested. But there could be 100 different people that own portions of the minerals underneath my property. Now there's different rights to each one of those people. Me as a surface owner, I have certain rights. The mineral owner has certain rights. What most people do not understand is the mineral estate is the dominant estate versus surface and mineral. Now they have a reasonable ability to produce the minerals that they own. This is the mineral owner. there's usually a conflict that can happen, especially when the surface and mineral rights have been completely removed from each other. You're going to see this type of conflict, not necessarily in rural areas, because in rural areas, typically a percentage of the minerals are still held by the surface owner, because you're talking about large farm owners, ranchers, things like that. And family still owns a portion of the minerals, if not a significant amount. Where the conflict really comes in is more urban areas. And I'll give you an example. Front Range of Colorado right now, outside of Denver, Longmont, Fort Collins, places like that. Traditionally, this is all farm ground. Right? This is all dryland wheat farming ground. And you had large tracts of land where a farmer would own a whole section of land. Well, over the last 20, 30, 40 years, that dryland farm section has now become a development, and there's 10,000 homes in that square mile. Well, what likely happened when that farmer sold that section, they sold it to a developer, a housing developer, and that housing developer probably retained all of the mineral rights. And when they subdivided the surface, they kept all the mineral rights and they sold the surface to individual homeowners. Can that create a conflict? Absolutely can create a conflict, because surface owners may have to deal with disturbances due to oil and gas activity, and they're not receiving the economic benefit directly from their property. They'll see it through taxes and schools and things like that, but they don't get it directly in their mailbox, where the land developer, who's completely satellite at this point, nowhere to be seen, is the one that owns the minerals. Or even the farmer or ranchers could still own a portion of them. But you have this segmented interest where that can absolutely create conflict. And again, the mineral estate is the dominant estate. Doesn't mean that it gives a mineral owner the ability to come in and just walk all over surface owner's property. That does not happen. It will not happen. But you want to make sure that when buying and selling property, just know whether there's high value minerals there or not. And if there are, understand what rights the mineral owner has versus the surface owner, and things there. So that is basically our presentation. I tried to get through that fairly quickly so we can answer some questions here. So let's jump into the chat and let's see what some questions are. Jordan, do you have anything teed up right now?
So Dave had a question / comment that went hand in hand with what you just wrapped up with. He says, I understand that in PA, that if one of the owners of mineral leases, they can, and company who lease to then develop it, and if they cannot get others to sign or find them, then they put the payments into a state account. And if no one claims after so many years, then money goes to state. Is this true? Again, oil and gas company told me this.
Yeah, so yes, absolutely. So let's cover, since we have some time here, what is the reason, why would you ever lease your minerals for oil and gas, number one? And I think this will help lead into touching on that question. The reason why mineral owners lease their property is because it's extraordinarily technical and expensive to extract, or to first of all find, extract, produce, and sell oil and gas minerals. The minerals are, up to, in some cases, 15, 20,000 feet in the ground. Pennsylvania, it's probably close to a mile and a half in the ground. But it's very, very expensive. The vast majority of landowners out there cannot and should not be participating and saying, I'm going to pay for all of the expenses. I'm going to take the risk, and I'm going to drill my own well. I can name, on one hand, private landowners who've been able to do that, and most of them transitioned to being an oil and gas company. So most mineral owners, they lease their property out to a highly technical and very well-funded oil and gas company who will come in and drill for those resources. If the company drills and makes a producing well, then it holds that lease for as long as that well is producing. The mineral owner will get paid a bonus. They'll get paid for however many acres they lease to the company, And then if the well produces, then that landowner is going to get paid a royalty. Older, when I say historic, anything from like 1950 up to 1970, typical royalty rates were 12.5%. Recently, up the last 10, 15 years, royalty rates are getting up to high as 25% in certain areas of the country, right? So it can be very lucrative for the mineral owner if a well is producing. If a well is drilled, and keep in mind that there has been a massive increase in the engineering success for drilling for oil and gas in the last 15, 20 years, they don't drill vertical wells so much anymore. They drill a vertical portion of the well, and then they drill horizontally up to 3 miles, sometimes 4 miles. I've seen, very rarely, but up to 4 miles. And that's going to include sometimes thousands of different mineral owners in one well, which is why the title work is unbelievably difficult and complicated to figure out. Just first of all, sometimes your own mineral ownership, but trying to figure out 1,000 different people's mineral ownership can be an extraordinary task to drill one well. In the event that they cannot locate, let's say there's 1,000 mineral owners in a drilling unit for a horizontal well in the state of Pennsylvania, and they find 999 mineral owners, and they've leased to those 999 mineral owners, but there's one that they can't find. No matter what, they've gone back all the way to 1860 when the minerals were patented, and they still can't find where these people are at. Well, that oil and gas company will drill the well. They'll force pool that one owner, or however many owners don't sign the lease or want to do that, or just choose not to participate. And that money will go into an escrow account. And depending on what state you're in, there are different regulations about how long that money needs to be in an escrow account and where it needs to go. In the state of Pennsylvania, likely that operator is probably going to know more specifically where those funds go. In a lot of cases, it does go to the state, and they'll use those funds for schools, roads, everything else that they use public money for.
We have Satish asking, how can I find who owns mineral rights on a given land?
So that's what's called a title check or title run. So it's very laborsome and expensive process. There are companies out there. Most companies, when you hear title companies, they're doing stuff for surface transactions, real estate, commercial real estate transactions. Mineral title companies, those are specific folks. If you have questions about your specific site, send us a message, get in contact with us, and we'll try to connect you with someone who can help you, assist you with that. We don't do that. That's not our expertise, but we do know a lot of folks in the business that can help you. And again, we would probably look at your parcel and look at it and say, is it going to be money ahead to even find out? Again, I mean, I'm giving the presentation. I don't know who owns the minerals underneath my property. It doesn't do me any good if I wanted to spend $5,000 to $10,000 to find out who all the owners are of the minerals on my property. There's no way I'm going to be money ahead, because my 40-acre tract, the minerals are not even worth close to $5,000 to $10,000. They're worth at best maybe $1,000. So you want to make sure that if you're going to go through that process, that it's worthwhile and that you're not just flushing your money down the drain. So I absolutely would want to help you out with that.
And then we have
Nice.
Thomas that has asked, I have RI in 3 wells that have had no production / revenue over the last 3 years. I see it had good production when it was shut in 2018. Is my minerals still held by production? What options do I have?
That's a really good question. So the RI on your pay statements means you have royalty interest on those wells. All of the wells listed in that pay statement are drilled and pooling your minerals. Okay, now each pool might be a little bit different for those wells, so you may have a different royalty interest in each one of those wells. But what that's showing you is based on how many net mineral acres you own and what lease amount you get. that is what you're individually being paid for the revenue on those wells. And anyone listening, if you have production on your wells and you're getting pay statements and it says RI on your pay statement, it's the same thing. That is the royalty that your minerals are earning you every pay period. Now, to the point where you had 3 wells that were producing in 2018, they shut the wells in for whatever reason. There's thousands, there's millions of different reasons of why you would shut a well in. For whatever reason, they shut the well in. For 3 years, you have not been paid, and meaning they have not been paying, likely been paying your production quotas there. So there's a couple things that the developer or the operator probably should be doing. Now, you would want to look at your individual lease and see what's called the shut-in clause. Okay, that's going to go back to whoever signed the first lease, and that can go back generations, especially if the wells have been producing for a long time. In that lease, it's going to show you, or it's going to declare, how long can they shut a well in, not pay you, and still have a valid lease? Because again, like I said, as long as the well is producing, that lease is going to be held, and it can be held in perpetuity as long as they're paying the mineral owner. Certain leases have specific time periods that the well has to produce. It either has to produce or the developer has to pay what's called a shut-in payment. So those are things that you need to kind of have your ears in the air up about. First of all, find out, what is the shut-in clause? How much time do they have to have that well shut in? 3 years is very long. Typically, you'd see 6 to 12 months, and most of the time that would break the lease. But what a lot of folks don't realize is the check that was coming in, it's not a royalty check, it's a shut-in payment check. And as long as you accept and take the shut-in payment check, then that is going to extend the leases. So check your records, make sure correspondence that you've had with the developer, if they've been sending you shut-in payments, things like that. It's not uncommon at all for especially larger operators of not trying to do anything nefarious, but if they own thousands and thousands of wells, sometimes it'll slip through the crack of, okay, well, we forgot to turn this well on. In that case, well, they would have lost their lease. So it does happen. It can happen. We've seen it many times with clients that use LandGate that realize that they had minerals and they're unleased. So there's a lot of different factors there. Check your records, and if you can find a copy of your lease, anybody in this call who has production, you should have a copy of your original lease. That's a critical document for you to have.
Julie asked, in Texas, a lot of mineral right owners retain surface rights when selling land. How do their surface rights differ from landowner surface rights?
Can you read that one more time? I'm hearing a lot of mineral owners retain surface
rights when selling land, but how do their surface rights differ from landowner surface rights? It sounds like if they have the mineral rights, maybe there might be a well. And if, they have to drill the well through the surface, maybe retaining that area of the surface rights, it sounds like.
Typically, when that question is asked, it's the opposite way. When you sell minerals, you can still, or maybe it's not. I mean, there's something called surface occupancy with minerals. If you own minerals somewhere where there's no surface occupancy, well, there's no it's essentially what it means. You cannot encumber the surface to get to your minerals. Now, with the advent of horizontal drilling and the increase in technology with the engineering, you can extract minerals and you can produce minerals without actually having to be on the surface. So maybe that's what she's talking about, and if that's the scenario, that's what we'll discuss. If you retain the minerals and you say, I'm still going to retain the opportunity to occupy the surface, that's likely what you should do. If you're retaining minerals, if you're selling property and your choice is to retain the minerals, you're still going to want to probably have a clause in there, and you're going to need an attorney to help you with this. Again, none of this is legal advice. Huge disclaimer there. I'm not an attorney. This is not legal advice. In that case, you'd want to work with an attorney and make sure that you'd have that buttoned up tightly with your closing documents. because you don't want to retain the mineral rights and sell the surface. And all of a sudden someone comes in and says, no, you don't have a right to get to the minerals because you didn't retain any surface occupancy. So that can be a difference between the surface owners who has rights to say, no, you can't come on the property because you can access your minerals, but you're going to have to drill from a different surface location and go underneath, but you can't come on the property, versus a surface owner who does not own minerals and the mineral owner retained the right to get to the surface. So I hope that touches on what she was asking. Go ahead, Jordan.
We have another question asking, how can you find out if your portion is being held in an escrow?
It's a good question. I've seen a lot of folks that own minerals, and they might not even know that they own minerals, and they get a letter in the mail that they have money in an escrow account. And I actually seen even more commonly that people go to sell their minerals and they find out from, as long as the purchasers of high moral character, they're going to tell them, it's like, well, you have some money in an escrow account, we'll pay you for that too. In a lot of cases I've seen with not the most highest moral character buyers, they're not going to tell you about that. They're just going to buy your minerals, and whoever owns the minerals has the right to what's in the escrow account. The best way to find out if you have money in an escrow account, first of all, you're going to need to know where your minerals are at. You're going to need to know the description. That's why we kind of went over township section range, the meets and bounds. Once you know relatively the location of where your minerals are at, utilize LandGate. The data we have out there is phenomenally expensive. It's incredibly expensive, but we put it out there to mineral owners to look for their specific, and landowners for their specific parcel at no cost. So that's what you're going to want to do. Find out where your minerals are at. Do some research on LandGate. Pull up the parcel, turn on the data, look and see if there's any producing wells nearby. And they don't even have to be producing. Look and see if there's plugged and abandoned wells on your property. If there's no wells nearby your property, you probably don't have money in an escrow account, but you could own minerals some other places where you're not aware of, and those minerals could have money in an escrow account. The very best way to do it, and again, you're going to have to balance whether this is cost effective for you, would be to do a title search, have a title attorney or a land company actually figure out where your net ownership is for the minerals. And then you can really do some more accurate due diligence. And again, you can use LandGate for that. And if you see that there's producing wells, we've had this scenario several times, people find out they own minerals in a certain area and there's producing wells in that section or in that area for the meets and bounds. And by no nefarious reason, the developer they don't put that money in their pocket. The operator doesn't put that money in their pocket. It's been going into an escrow account, because they couldn't find you or whoever the descendant was who owned the minerals, and maybe it wasn't probated correctly or something like that, but they couldn't find who to actually pay. So in those cases, as soon as you find out that you are the owner of those minerals, it's not difficult to get your money out of escrow. You essentially need to do, again, this is not legal advice in any way, shape, or form, but you're going to have to identify yourself in the county, legally identify yourself in the county at the clerk at the records office, and then notify the developer, hey, here you are. This is how you receive the minerals. This is who you legally are, and that money belongs to you. So you need to find out what you own, number one, or you're not going to find out if there's anything in an escrow account. Okay, Jordan, go ahead.
So David asked, where is the directory of companies that develop wind and solar with their contact information?
So better than having a directory of folks and cold calling them and asking them to be interested in your property, what is special about our marketplace is you don't need to have a Rolodex. You don't need to have a contact list and start cold calling folks. If you're a landowner, if you represent land, if you are a land professional, you can create your listing very quickly. It only takes a few minutes, but you create your listing up on LandGate, and it goes in front of all of those different developers. Some of the largest energy companies on the planet, they use LandGate. And they are currently right now, they have folks in their land teams. Every time a listing goes up on LandGate, their team looks at it and sees if it fits their area of interest and it meets their qualifications. And if so, they reach out directly to that person. So I would recommend if solar, wind, carbon, any of these natural resources, if that's something you want to get your property out in front of these developers, the absolute best way to do that, create a listing up on LandGate, and it's going to go in front of those folks. Then you're going to find out. I can give you my personal opinion, whether I think it's high value or low value. But once it's in a competitive marketplace, you're going to find out, okay, well, maybe, and my own personal property, I have listed for carbon credits. It's 40 acres. It's not the highest carbon sequestering type of timberland in the United States. I know that, but I'm going to try. I'm going to put it out there. I'm probably not going to get a listing, but I'm going to find out, yeah, carbon credits probably isn't the best way to do it. Maybe I have some other opportunities with some of the other natural resources. So that's the best way to do it if you're interested in trying to get your property into one of those programs. Go ahead, Jordan.
So Dave has asked, how do I contact you and discuss my problem with the state and gas company? They are stealing our Marcellus gas. We have a 460-acre senior warrant completely surrounded by state land. He's asking, can I hire you and how much? This is in Center Co-PA. If you have shallow well gas lease, does this convert to deep well Marcellus gas in PA? So he asked two things, but
yep. Yeah, I'll touch on both of them. So I think if there's a legal problem, you're going to need to probably contact a local attorney who can deal with energy. Feel free to contact us. We'll recommend some folks in the area that some of our other landowner and the clients that we work with, that they work with, so we can definitely help you out there. The second portion of the question, many times leases have what's called a depth segregation clause. So in this particular instance, and this is not just in Pennsylvania, but it can be coal bed methane in Wyoming or shallow oil and gas production in Texas. If you have shallow wells that only go a certain depth into the ground, those portions of the minerals are under a certain lease. Could be with one developer. Everything below that could be unleased. They could be leased to a completely different developer, things like that. So, and I've actually seen even segregated ownership, where certain people own parts of what we call the stratigraphic column. They own certain parts of the rock, certain depths, and another owner owns different depths. So keep that in mind, that your minerals, especially if you have them there, they could be subject to multiple different leases, or some minerals may be leased, other minerals may not be. But yeah, go ahead and contact us. Feel free to put a contact me form in LandGate, and we'll get you some contacts of some legal professionals who can probably help you out with your first question.
I did put in the chat our landowner phone number and an email to ease that communication gap. So feel free to call or email. So Christian had another question. They asked, when will you open up to work with countries like South Africa and Africa? And follow-up question still from Christian, will you be able to assist in buying carbon credits? We have 7,500 hectare of government-owned land and need to come up with a carbon credit solution. We have various parties involved, and will you be willing to join Africa in getting a carbon credit solution up and running?
So the first question, we're not currently supporting any other country outside of the United States at this point. I would love to. I personally have a connection with Africa and some businesses there. I think it's a phenomenal and absolutely unbelievable resource of the planet is Africa, and hopefully things can be done correctly there for what's there for rare earth elements, critical elements, things like that, because what's going on right now is not great. Not good at all. But to go go further down that line. We'd love to expand, but we really want to focus right now on what we do, doing it very, very well. Right? We don't want to get too far. In Colorado, we say you don't want to get too far out over your skis, then you crash. But that's not what we want to do. There's a significant amount of interest to go to portions of Africa where there's the enormous natural resources, Australia, Canada, Mexico. So it is in our long-term view to get our platform and data analytics marketplace out to some of these other areas across the globe. But right now we are just focused on the United States. On carbon credits, carbon credits are kind of a unique deal. If you have certified carbon credits or things like that, or a project that you would like to market out to the carbon credit industry, you may be able to utilize our marketplace for that, because there's a lot of domestic US buyers of carbon credits that may be interested in looking at your project. So we would just have to look at it specifically. Feel free to contact us and let's see if we can make something work for what you have right now, since we're just domestic US, and see if we can make something work on the carbon credit side. Okay, go ahead, Michaela. We'll do a couple more here because we're getting to the top of the hour.
So Satish asked, when property is sold, including the mineral rights, whose responsibility is it to update that with oil company? I was told by title company, oil company will contact the new owner. Is that true?
For the most part, it is. But it's typically up to the buyer. So if you're selling mineral rights, there's really no burden for you whatsoever. I mean, you're selling your minerals, you're selling your royalty payments. They keep paying you great, but it's more on the buyer. So if you're buying mineral rights, the burden is on the buyer to make sure everything is registered at the county. Once it's registered at the county, then the developer will likely receive notification and they will get all of their payments updated, things like that. But it is up to the buyer to make sure that the new mineral deed is recorded at the county courthouse, wherever the mineral transaction took place, and they're the ones that need to get that done. So keep that in mind. That's the typical question of people who are selling. Most mineral owners aren't buying more minerals, they're just selling minerals. There's no closing costs, there's no title due diligence costs. If there should never be for the seller, the burden's always on the buyer there.
Thomas asked, do you have to list property on LandGate to get appraised valuation? I'm not sure I want to list the property.
So we walk a very fine line of the verbiage that we use. We don't call these appraisals. We're not appraisers. Been yelled at by plenty of appraisers in public forums before. We do valuations. So we do the calculations that they typically won't do and can't do, but we do a valuation based on all of the resources that's there. You do not have to create a listing to get the value of your property. All you have to do is go to landgate.com, type in your address, or do a map-based search and go to your parcel. You'll have to claim ownership. So you'll have to you will have to create a free account. There's no cost to that, but create an account, claim ownership, and then you're going to go ahead and be able to find out what those values are for that specific parcel. So yeah, you don't need to create a listing.
The last question that we have is from William. He asks, is there a way to find out if my home has mineral rights on it? I know you've answered this before. So if you just want to do a quick, he may have joined a little bit late.
Yeah, and the best way to find out, Frank, is number one, go to LandGate, take a look at and see, is it worthwhile to go down the rabbit hole of trying to find out whether there's mineral rights there or not? See if there's value, see if there is oil and gas activity around your parcel, see if there's mining activity around your parcel. If there's not, the minerals are likely worth nothing. So that's one thing. Another way to look at it, if you do have activity in your area, a couple basic questions can usually determine whether or not you own the minerals. You're going to want to go back and say, was the property passed down to you? And if if you inherited the property, did any of the previous owners, did they ever lease the property for mineral exploration? Did they ever get paid for oil and gas wells, minerals, things like that? You yourself, go back through your records. Have you ever received notifications in the mail to see, did anybody want to lease your property for oil and gas production or mining production? Have you ever been accosted to someone trying to accosted is the wrong word. Have you been approached by someone to have them purchase your minerals? If that's the case, you likely do own some portion of those minerals. But if the answer to all those questions is no, 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 the likelihood is that you probably do not own the minerals, or if you're in an area that has no mineral exploration potential, you could own the minerals, but they're not worth anything. So I hope that helps further understanding there. But we are at the top of the hour. I want to appreciate or thank you all for joining. I hope this was worthwhile. You can tell, ask Jordan, I try to make these always like 20, 30 minutes so I don't lose people's attention, but this was a very engaging, what I'd say this is the most engaging webinar I've ever been on. So hopefully we answered a lot of questions. Hopefully we didn't create too many more. That's not the goal, but again, you know, you guys utilize the LandGate tool. It's an amazing resource for landowners. It doesn't cost you anything to research your property. And then if you find out that there's high value resources for some of your assets or properties, feel free to create a listing and try to get some additional revenue for those resources. And again, utilize us as a resource. We have a lot of educational blogs. If you have questions, solar, wind, oil and gas, look in our news feed, look in the blogs, and most likely if you have a question about any of those resources, we've posted some resources. We've posted content and documents for that. So feel free to utilize us as a resource. Always, you know, LandGate, we are the ultimate landowner resource. So thanks again, everybody. I appreciate your time. Again, this has been recorded. It is going to go back out to everybody. So feel free to share it with friends, family members. Let them know that if they're also landowners, you know, or mineral owners, that we're a resource for them as well. So
yeah, this recording will be emailed on Friday. All to you again for you to rewatch, re-listen. We'll include some resources on there as well. If you lose the contact information that I've shared, you can just reply back to that email and someone will get into contact with you.
Well, perfect. Jordan, thanks for formatting and putting everything on. Everybody have a great day. Thank you.